Why do you keep it?" The question, spoken in the clear, piping voice of a 5-year-old boy, cut through the quiet hum of the afternoon. Eleanor's needle froze mid-stitch, hovering over the gray wool of the fisherman's sock she was darning. She did not need to look. She knew precisely what her son, Julian, was holding. The small, carved wooden box was meant to be hidden, tucked away at the very bottom of her sewing basket, beneath spare skeins of yarn and scraps of linen. But Julian had the curious, unstoppable fingers of all small boys, and he had unearthed her one secret. He had opened it. Slowly, she lifted her head. He sat on the rag rug before the small hearth, the fire little more than glowing embers against the mild coastal air. The miniature was in his hand. It was an oval portrait, painted on ivory, of a man so painfully handsome it seemed a cruelty. Dark hair, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of a stormy sky. The eyes of a duke, the eyes of his father. Julian's own eyes, the very same shade of gray, looked from the portrait to his mother's face, filled with an unnerving, innocent perception. "Mr. Harding asked you to marry him," Julian stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "He is kind. He brought me a wooden bird." Eleanor's throat felt tight. She put the sock and needle aside, her hands suddenly unsteady. "Yes, he did." "And Mr. Thorne, he has a big farm with ponies. He said I could ride one." "Yes, he did say that." "And the Reverend. He smiles all the time." He paused, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "You said no to all of them, but you keep him." He tapped a small finger against the painted face of Alistair Beaumont, Duke of Blackwood. Why? How could she explain it to a child? How could she explain it to herself? For 6 years she had been Ellen Croft, a widow who earned her keep with her needle in the remote fishing village of Oakhaven. She had built a life from the ashes of another, a life of profound quiet and fierce, protective love for the boy who was her entire world. Mr. Harding, the village doctor, was a good man. Mr. Thorne, a wealthy landowner, was steady. The Reverend was gentle. Any one of them would have offered her and Julian security, a place in the small, tight-knit community. But accepting them would have been a lie, a different kind of lie from the one she was already living. Her life as Ellen Croft was a fortress built to protect him. Marrying one of them would be building a new, more comfortable cage around her own heart, a heart that, despite everything, still held the ghost of the man in the painting. It was not love, she told herself. It was the scar tissue around a wound, too deep to ever fully heal. "It is just a memory, my love," she said, her voice softer than she intended. She knelt on the rug beside him, the rough wool scratching her knees through her simple muslin dress. The scent of salt and drying nets drifted through the open cottage door. Julian looked at the portrait again. He looked sad. The observation struck her with the force of a physical blow. She had never seen sadness in that portrait. She had seen arrogance, confidence, the easy assurance of a man born to rule the world, the man who had, with a few cold words, shattered hers. "Does he?" she whispered, taking the miniature from his small hand. The ivory was cool against her skin. She looked at it, truly looked at it, for the first time in years. The artist had captured a fleeting vulnerability in the set of his mouth, a shadow in those famous Beaumont eyes that she had been too young, too dazzled, or too hurt to ever notice before. Sad? No. He had been angry. He had been glacial. She remembered the feel of the library at Blackwood Manor, not the comfortable scent of leather and old paper, but the cold, dead air of a tomb. Rain had lashed against the tall, mullioned windows, a frantic, weeping sound that echoed the storm inside the room. She had stood before his desk, the fine silk of her morning gown feeling like a shroud. He had not shouted. Alistair Beaumont was a man of immense, terrifying control. His voice had been low, each word a perfectly polished stone dropped into a deep, silent well. "I have been made aware of your correspondence." He had pushed a small stack of letters across the polished mahogany. Her name was written on the outside in a delicate, feminine script she did not recognize. Inside, the words were a vile, passionate confession of love and clandestine meetings, addressed to a man she had never met. The forgery was exquisite. "This is not my hand," she had said, her own voice a stranger's, thin and reedy. "No?" The single word was steeped in a chilling disbelief. "Your aunt saw you with him. In the gardens. She was most distressed to have to tell me." His aunt, Lady Augusta, a woman whose smiles were like the flash of a blade, whose kindness always came with a price. Augusta, who had watched Eleanor's every move since the wedding day, with a hungry, possessive jealousy over the nephew she had raised as her own. "I have never been unfaithful to you," Eleanor had said, the floor seeming to tilt beneath her feet. "Alistair, you must believe me." He had looked at her then, and his face was a mask of stone. All the warmth she had occasionally glimpsed, the brief moments of connection she had clung to in their cool, arranged marriage, were gone. In their place was the cold judgment of a stranger. He believed the lie. He believed his aunt. He did not believe his wife. "The Blackwood name will not be tarnished by a public scandal," he had said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion at all. "You will retire to the Dowager House, quietly. There will be a generous allowance. You will want for nothing, except your freedom." It was a life sentence, a gilded prison, to be locked away, the disgraced, Mad Duchess, while he continued his life. She was 20 years old, and in that moment, something inside her, the soft, pliable girl who had wanted only to please her powerful husband, had died. It was replaced by something harder, colder, something that could survive. That night, she had fled. She had not taken the famous Blackwood sapphires that lay cold and heavy on her dressing table. She had not taken the gowns or the furs. She had left her wedding ring beside the jewels. She had taken only a small purse of her own money, a simple traveling cloak, and the unborn, unknown child within her. She had walked out of Blackwood Manor and never looked back. "Mama?" Julian's voice pulled her back to the present, to the small, safe cottage with its scent of soap and sea air. "Are you crying?" She touched her cheek. It was wet. She had not even realized. "No, darling." She forced a smile, tucking the miniature back into its box and closing the lid with a definitive snap. "Just a bit of dust in my eye from the rug." She could not tell him that he had his father's eyes. She could not tell him that his father was a duke who thought his mother a whore. She could not tell him that the man in the painting was both the source of her deepest pain and the reason for her greatest joy. So she held the contradictions inside her, a secret, heavy ballast that kept her upright in the stormy seas of her life. She had refused 3 good men because their kindness felt like a betrayal of a truth only she knew. Marrying one of them would mean finally, irrevocably, letting Alistair go, and as much as she hated him, as much as she despised the man who had condemned her without a trial, the thought of severing that last, invisible thread was a pain she was not yet strong enough to bear. The miniature was not a token of love. It was a reminder. It was the face of her son's legacy, a legacy she had stolen for him, to give him a life of freedom instead of a life of shame. It was the face of her own survival. And as she put the box back into the depths of her sewing basket, she wondered, not for the first time, if keeping it was a weakness or a strength. The silence in Blackwood Manor was a physical presence. It was a thick, suffocating blanket, woven from dust motes dancing in the pale afternoon light, the scent of beeswax, and 6 years of unspoken regret. Alistair, the Duke of Blackwood, stood by the tall library window, the same window where Rain had once wept for a life he had destroyed, and stared out at the manicured lawns. They were unnaturally green, perfectly sculpted, and utterly lifeless, much like himself. He was 31 years old, a man at the peak of his power and influence. He was master of one of the largest fortunes in England, and he was utterly, profoundly empty. The title was a weight, the fortune a burden, the house a mausoleum. A faint rustle of silk announced his aunt's arrival. Lady Augusta entered the library as if she owned it, which, in a way, she did. She had filled the vacuum Eleanor's departure had left, becoming the de facto mistress of Blackwood, her presence as pervasive and clinging as the ivy on the ancient stone walls. "Alistair, darling," she said, her voice a smooth, cultured caress that always set his teeth on edge. "You have been brooding in here for an hour. The Langleys will be arriving for dinner soon. You must make an effort." He turned from the window. She was dressed in a deep amethyst gown, a color too youthful for her, too vibrant, and around her throat, catching the light, was the necklace, the Blackwood sapphires. They were magnificent stones, a river of deep blue fire that had belonged to generations of duchesses of Blackwood. Eleanor had worn them on their wedding day. She had looked ethereal, terrified, and beautiful. He had not seen them since the night she had vanished. He had assumed them lost, taken with her. But here they were, around Augusta's neck. A cold dread, slow and creeping, began to uncoil in his gut. It was a feeling he had been suppressing for years, a dark suspicion that he had refused to examine too closely, because the implications were too monstrous to contemplate. "Where did you get that?" His voice was quiet, but it had a dangerous edge that made Augusta's smile falter for a fraction of a second. "This," she trilled, touching the central stone with a proprietary air. "My dear, it was simply sitting in the safe. Such a shame to let it gather dust. It is a family heirloom, after all. And as the lady of the house, Eleanor's things were packed and sent to the Dowager House as I instructed," he said, his gaze unwavering. "All of them." "Well, the staff must have missed a few things in their haste," she said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. "It is of no consequence." Of no consequence. The words echoed in the silent room. He remembered that night with a clarity that felt like a fresh wound. He remembered the cold fury, the bitter, wounded pride. He had been so certain. The letters, her supposed lover, Augusta's tearful, reluctant confession of what she had seen. It had all fit together into a neat, ugly picture of betrayal. He had been so quick to believe the worst of the quiet, shy girl he had married, a girl who had seemed more intimidated by him than enamored. He had wanted to be angry. It was easier than admitting the truth, that their marriage was a hollow sham, a union of convenience that he had made no effort to turn into anything more. He had been a poor husband, distant, preoccupied, emotionally inept. It had been easier to believe her unfaithful than to believe himself a failure. "I have been thinking about Eleanor," he said, the name feeling strange on his tongue after so many years of silence. Augusta's posture stiffened. "Why on earth would you do that? It is best to let that unfortunate business lie in the past." "She never went to the Dowager House," he stated. "She vanished, entirely. A duchess of the realm does not simply vanish without a trace." "She ran off with her lover, no doubt," Augusta sniffed. "Good riddance. She was never worthy of the Blackwood name. Weak blood." He looked at the sapphires again. Eleanor had left them. She had also left her wedding ring. A woman running away to a lover would have taken her jewels, the most portable and valuable form of wealth she possessed. She would not have left them sitting on her dressing table. A woman fleeing in shame and despair, with nothing but the clothes on her back, would have. The dread in his gut was now a cold, sickening certainty. He had been a fool, a blind, arrogant, manipulated fool. "I have hired a man," he said, watching his aunt's face carefully. "A Mr. Finch, an inquiry agent. He is very discreet. He has been looking for her." For the first time, a flicker of genuine panic crossed Augusta's features. It was there for only a second. quickly masked by an expression of indignation, but he saw it. "You did what?" she gasped. "Alistair, have you gone mad? Do you want this scandal dredged up all over again? Think of the family's reputation." "I am thinking of my wife," he said, the words tasting of ash. "For the first time in 6 years, I am truly thinking of my wife, the one I condemned without a trial." He walked past her, out of the library, leaving her standing there with the stolen sapphires glittering around her throat. He needed air. He needed to be away from the cloying scent of her perfume and the suffocating weight of his own failure. He went to his study and unlocked a drawer in his desk. Inside was a single piece of paper. The first report from Mr. Finch, delivered a week ago. It had been a dead end, a false trail. But a new report was due any day. For 6 years, he had allowed himself to believe a convenient, pride-salving lie. He had let his aunt consolidate her power, turning his home into her personal fiefdom. He had lived in a gilded cage of his own making, haunted by a ghost he had created. No more. He would find Eleanor, and he would not simply ask for her forgiveness. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he would have to crawl through fire to earn it. The man she had known would not be the man who found her. He would tear down the edifice of his pride, stone by stone, until only the truth remained. And he prayed, with a desperation that was entirely new to him, that it would not be too late. A week later, the new report from Mr. Finch arrived. It was a thin envelope, sealed with plain wax. Alistair's hand trembled as he broke the seal. He had spent the intervening days in a state of suspended animation, his interactions with his aunt curt and clipped, his mind a maelstrom of self-recrimination and burgeoning, terrifying hope. He had confronted Augusta about the sapphires again, more forcefully this time. Her story had changed. She claimed a maid had found them tucked away and brought them to her. Her lies were becoming clumsy, transparent. The panic he had glimpsed was now a permanent feature in her eyes. He unfolded the single sheet of paper. Mr. Finch's script was neat, precise, and devoid of emotion. "Your Grace, following the line of inquiry regarding household staff dismissed in the year 1846, I located a former housemaid, one Mary Stokes. She recalled the Duchess speaking fondly of the coastal village of Oakhaven, where she had spent a summer as a child. A discreet visit was made. A woman matching the Duchess's description has been residing there for nearly 6 years, under the name Mrs. Ellen Croft. She is known as a seamstress, a widow. She has a son, approximately 5 years of age." Alistair read the last sentence 3 times. The paper shook in his hand. A son, 5 years of age. The math was brutally, beautifully simple. He felt the air leave his lungs in a rush, his knees suddenly weak. He sank into the chair behind his desk, the world tilting on its axis. A son. His son. The quiet, empty halls of Blackwood Manor suddenly echoed with the ghost of a child's laughter. The years of silence, of hollow regret, crashed down upon him with the force of a physical blow. He had not just lost a wife. He had lost his son. He had missed the first 5 years of his own child's life. He looked around the opulent study, at the priceless artifacts, the leather-bound books, the symbols of his immense wealth and power. They were all meaningless, ash and dust. He had an heir he had never known, an heir being raised in a fishing village by a woman he had grievously wronged. The rage came next. It was a pure, white-hot fury directed at 2 people, his aunt and himself, her for her venomous, craven manipulation, him for his blind, arrogant stupidity. He had been a prize bull, led by a ring through his nose. He had let his pride and his faith in the wrong person destroy the one thing that might have ever been real in his life. He stood up, his movements sharp and decisive. The torpor was gone, replaced by a singular, burning purpose. He strode from the study and found Augusta in the morning room, arranging flowers in a vase. "Pack your things," he said, his voice dangerously low. She looked up, startled. "Alistair? What on earth are you talking about? The Langleys can dine in hell for all I care." He cut her off, his voice like the crack of a whip. "You will be gone from this house within the hour." "Have you lost your senses?" she cried, her face paling. "On the contrary, I have just found them." He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. "I know about Oakhaven. I know about my son." The name of the village was a physical blow. She flinched, dropping a white rose. The mention of the son made her gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. The sapphires at her throat seemed to mock him. "I don't know what you mean," she stammered, her eyes wide with real fear now. "Do not lie to me again," he snarled. "Not in this house. You poisoned me against my wife. You drove her away. You let me believe a lie for 6 years while my son grew up without a father. Every second of that is on your soul. She was not worthy, a weak, simpering little thing. You needed a strong woman by your side. Me." Her voice rose, cracking with decades of resentment and thwarted ambition. "I needed my wife," he said, the simple truth of it aching in his chest. "And my son." He turned his back on her. "A carriage will be waiting. You will go to the dower house, the real one this time. You will live on the allowance I provide, and you will never set foot in Blackwood or any of my properties again. If you try to contact me, or her, it will be cut off. You will be left with nothing. Do you understand me?" She stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief and hatred. Then, slowly, she seemed to crumble. The fight went out of her, replaced by a bitter, ugly defeat. She nodded, a single jerky motion. He did not wait for an answer. He walked out, calling for his valet. He had his own packing to do. He was going to Oakhaven. The journey was a torment. Every turn of the carriage wheels was too slow. He alternated between fantasies of a joyful reunion and nightmares of her turning him away with the same cold disgust he had once shown her. The knowledge of his son was a constant, burning fire in his chest. What was his name? What did he look like? Did he have Eleanor's gentle smile? He arrived in Oakhaven as dusk was settling, casting a soft, pearlescent light over the small stone cottages and the fishing boats bobbing in the harbor. The air smelled of salt, fish, and damp earth. It was a world away from the manicured perfection of Blackwood. It felt real. He took a room at the local inn, the Weary Traveler, under his own name. The appearance of a duke in their humble establishment caused a stir, but Alistair was oblivious to the whispers and stares. He asked the innkeeper, a sturdy woman with kind eyes, if she knew a Mrs. Ellen Croft. "Aye, that I do," the woman, a Mrs. Gable, replied, eyeing him with open curiosity. "A good woman is Ellen. Quiet. Keeps to herself. Lives in the little cottage at the end of the lane, the one with the blue door." He thanked her and walked, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The lane was cobbled and uneven. He saw the cottage, a curl of smoke rising from its chimney. There was a light in the window. He stopped. He could not just knock on the door. What would he say? "I have come to ruin your life again?" As he hesitated, the door opened. A small boy, no older than 5, ran out into the small patch of garden, chasing a moth. He had a mop of unruly dark hair and a serious, determined expression. Then he turned, and his eyes met Alistair's. They were gray, the color of a stormy sky. They were his eyes, the Beaumont eyes. Time stopped. The world narrowed to the space between him and this small, perfect stranger who was his own flesh and blood. The boy stared at him with an unnerving intensity, a look of frank curiosity, not fear. Then a woman's voice called from the doorway, "Julian, come inside now. It's getting chilly." Eleanor. She stepped out of the cottage, wiping her hands on an apron. She was not the Duchess of Blackwood. That woman had been a creature of silk and pearls, her hair always perfectly coiffed. This woman wore a simple, faded dress. Her beautiful auburn hair was braided and pinned in a simple coronet, with stray tendrils escaping around her face. She was thinner, and the softness of youth had been replaced by a new strength in the lines of her face. She was more beautiful than he had ever remembered. She saw him. Her smile faltered. The color drained from her face. Her hand, which had been reaching for her son, dropped to her side. She froze, a statue carved from shock and disbelief. Her eyes, the warm hazel he remembered, were wide with a look he recognized. It was the same look she'd had in the library 6 years ago. Fear, and a deep, bottomless pain. The boy, Julian, looked from Alistair to his mother and back again. He pointed a small finger at Alistair. "Mama," he said, his voice clear in the evening quiet. "He looks like the man in the box." The silence that followed was absolute. It was broken only by the distant cry of a gull and the soft sigh of the waves on the shore. Eleanor stared at him, her face a pale, unreadable mask. The revelation from her son seemed to have shattered her composure completely. For a long moment, she simply stood there, framed in the warm light of the cottage doorway, a ghost from a life he had carelessly thrown away. Then her training, the ingrained discipline of a duchess, took over. Her spine straightened. The shock in her eyes was banked, replaced by a cold, protective fire. She moved with a swift, fluid grace, stepping in front of Julian and placing a hand on his small shoulder, pulling him slightly behind her. It was the gesture of a lioness shielding her cub. "Julian," she said, her voice low and steady, though Alistair could see the frantic pulse beating at the base of her throat. "Go inside, now." The boy looked up at her, then back at the tall, imposing stranger. He opened his mouth to protest, but something in his mother's tone brooked no argument. He gave Alistair one last, curious look and slipped back into the cottage, closing the door softly behind him. They were alone. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Her voice was not the soft, hesitant whisper he remembered. It was honed to a fine, sharp edge. It was the voice of Ellen Croft, a woman who had fought for her survival, not Eleanor Beaumont, the Duchess who had been taught to defer. He took a step forward. "Eleanor, Do not call me that," she snapped. "That woman is dead. You killed her." The words struck him with the force of a physical blow. He stopped. "She is not dead. I am looking at her." "You are looking at a seamstress," she retorted, her chin high. "A widow. My name is Ellen Croft. Now I will ask you again. What are you doing here, Your Grace?" The formal title was a slap in the face. It erected a wall between them as high and as cold as the one around Blackwood Manor. "I know," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know everything. Augusta, the letters, the lies. I have spent 6 years as the worst kind of fool, and there is not a moment of the day that I do not regret what I did, what I said, how I failed you." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped her. You know now. It is a bit late for epiphanies, is it not? 6 years late, a son late." "I only just found out, about him, about any of it," he pleaded, taking another cautious step. "I hired a man. He found you. The moment I knew, I came." "You came," she repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. "And what did you expect? That I would fall into your arms? That I would thank you for finally discovering a truth that was laid at your feet 6 years ago? I told you they were forgeries. I begged you to believe me. And my pride would not let me," he admitted, the confession costing him dearly. "My arrogance, my weakness. I believed the easy lie instead of the difficult truth. It is the great shame of my life." "Your shame is not my concern," she said, her voice like ice. "My concern is in that cottage. He has a good life here, A quiet life, a safe life. He does not need a duke for a father, especially not one who would cast his mother aside on the word of a jealous viper. Every word was true. Every accusation was deserved. And it was 1,000 times worse than any nightmare he had imagined. He had expected tears, anger, recriminations. He had not expected this. This cold, unbreachable wall of contempt. She was not just hurt. She despised him. "He is my son, Eleanor." "He is my son," she corrected him fiercely. "I am the one who carried him. I am the one who felt him kick. I am the one whose body was torn apart bringing him into this world, alone, in a rented room above a bakery. I am the one who stitched clothes until my fingers bled to feed him. I am the one who held him through fevers and sleepless nights. Where were you, Your Grace?" "Oh, that's right. You were at Blackwood, believing I was a whore. So do not you dare come here now and claim him. You have no right." He had no answer for that. There was none. He could not defend the indefensible. All he could do was stand there and take it, letting her righteous fury wash over him. "I am not here to claim him," he said quietly, when she had fallen silent, her chest heaving with the force of her tirade. "I am not here to take either of you away. I am here to atone." She looked at him, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Atone? What does that even mean? You think you can sweep into this village with your title and your money and make everything right? Some things cannot be fixed, Duke. You broke us. You broke me." "I know," he whispered, "but I have to try. I cannot go back to that empty house, to that empty life, knowing what I know now, knowing that I have a son who thinks I am just a sad man in a box." Her composure cracked at that. A flicker of the old Eleanor, the vulnerable girl he had married, showed in her eyes. The mention of the miniature, their son's innocent words, had hit a nerve. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice weary, the fight momentarily draining out of her. "Nothing," he said. "I want nothing from you. I will not force you to do anything. But I will not leave. I have taken a room at the inn. I will stay in Oakhaven. And I will spend every day that I have left trying to prove to you that I am not the man who sent you away." She stared at him for a long, silent moment, searching his face. He let her look, keeping his own expression open, hiding nothing of the desperate sincerity he felt. He had to make her see that this was not another ducal command, another act of arrogant possession. This was a plea. Finally, she gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "You are wasting your time." "It is my time to waste," he replied. She held his gaze for another second, then turned without another word and went back into the cottage, shutting the door firmly behind her. The click of the latch was as final as a prison gate slamming shut. He stood alone in the lane as darkness fell completely, the salt spray cool on his face. He had found her. He had seen his son, and he had been utterly, comprehensively rejected. It was no less than he deserved. But as he turned and walked back toward the faint lights of the inn, a strange, unfamiliar feeling settled in his chest. It was not hope. It was something harder, more durable. It was resolve. He had made a promise. He would not leave. The atonement had begun. The Duke of Blackwood staying at the Weary Traveler was a scandal that shook Oakhaven to its foundations. News traveled faster than a dropped fishing net. By morning, the entire village knew. They stared at him with a mixture of awe, suspicion, and naked curiosity when he emerged from the inn. He ignored them. His focus was singular. He walked to the small cottage with the blue door. He did not knock. Instead, he stopped at the rickety fence that enclosed her small garden. He saw a pile of uncut logs near the side of the house, a task clearly too heavy for a woman alone. Her axe was propped against the pile, its blade nicked. He walked back to the village, found the blacksmith, and purchased the sharpest axe he had. He paid for it with a gold sovereign, a sum that could have bought half the man's inventory, and ignored the smith's slack-jawed astonishment. He returned to the cottage and began to chop the wood. He was not a man accustomed to physical labor. His hands, soft and manicured, were blistered within the hour. His back ached. The muscles in his arms screamed in protest, but he did not stop. He worked with a grim, methodical rhythm. The sharp crack of the axe splitting wood, the thud of the logs landing on the growing pile. It was a penitent's work. Eleanor heard him. She watched from behind the thin curtains of her window, her heart a confusion of warring emotions. Rage, first and foremost. How dare he? How dare he insert himself into her life, performing this parody of humble labor? It was an act, a show for the village, a way to pressure her. But as the hours passed and he did not stop, another feeling began to surface, a reluctant, grudging respect. He was clumsy. He was clearly in pain. His fine coat was discarded on the grass, his shirt sleeves were rolled up, and his linen shirt was soaked with sweat. He was a duke, a man who had never had to lift anything heavier than a pen, and yet he worked like a common laborer, his jaw set in a line of stubborn determination. Julian watched him too, his nose pressed against the window pane. "Is that the man from the box, Mama?" "Yes, darling." "Why is he chopping our wood?" I don't know," she admitted. It was the truth. She did not understand what he was doing. This was not the Alistair she knew. The man she knew would have sent a footman. When the entire pile was chopped and neatly stacked against the cottage wall, Alistair paused, wiping his brow with the back of a bloody, blistered hand. He put on his coat, picked up the new axe, and simply walked away, back toward the inn, without a single glance at the cottage. He did not ask for thanks. He did not demand an audience. He simply did the work and left. The gesture was more powerful than any apology. The next day he returned. He saw that a loose shutter was banging against the wall in the sea breeze. He disappeared and returned with a ladder and tools. He fixed the shutter. The day after that, he noticed a section of the thatched roof was thin and likely to leak. He spent the day negotiating with the local thatcher, paying an exorbitant price to have the entire roof repaired immediately. Eleanor remained inside her fortress, watching him. She did not speak to him. She did not acknowledge him. But she saw. She saw the way he moved, with a new, weary purpose. She saw the villagers begin to whisper among themselves, their suspicions slowly turning to a grudging admiration. The Grand Duke was not behaving like a duke. He was behaving like a man with a guilty conscience. One afternoon, Julian escaped the cottage while she was distracted by a complicated piece of sewing. He walked right up to Alistair, who was mending the broken gate on her fence. Eleanor's heart leapt into her throat. She rushed to the door, ready to snatch her son away. But she stopped, hidden in the shadow of the doorway, and watched. Alistair did not see the boy approach at first. Julian stood there silently for a full minute, watching the Duke's large, clumsy hands work the hammer and nails. "You are not very good at that," Julian observed, with the brutal honesty of a child. Alistair started, nearly dropping the hammer. He looked down at the small boy, and a complex expression crossed his face. Pain, love, and a profound, aching regret. He slowly knelt, bringing himself down to Julian's level. His knees cracked. "No," Alistair said, his voice quiet. "I am not. I have never done it before." "My mama can do it," Julian said proudly. "She can do anything." "I am sure she can," Alistair agreed. "She is a very strong woman." "Why are you here?" Julian asked, the same question he had asked his mother, but this time directed at the source. Alistair was silent for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I made a mistake. A long time ago. I hurt your mother very much. I am here to try and make it right." "Are you the sad man in the box?" Alistair's throat worked. "Yes, I suppose I am." "Why are you sad?" "Because I was a fool," Alistair said simply. "And I lost something very precious. The most precious thing in the world." He was looking at Julian, but Eleanor knew he was talking about both of them. Eleanor felt the tears welling in her eyes again. This was not an act. The pain in his voice was raw, real. He was not speaking to her, or to the village. He was speaking to his son, with a simple, devastating honesty. She stepped out of the doorway. Alistair saw her and immediately stood up, a flush spreading across his face, as if she had caught him in a crime. "I apologize," he said formally. "I did not mean to speak with him without your permission." She ignored that. She looked at the neatly stacked firewood, the repaired shutter, the solid new gate. She looked at his hands, which were bandaged now. She looked at his face, which was thinner than she remembered, etched with sleeplessness and a sorrow that finally matched the one in the portrait. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice softer than it had been before. "I told you. I am here to atone," he said. "These are just things, small things. They mean nothing. I am also working on the larger things." "Larger things?" "Your name," he said. "The truth. It is not enough that I know it. The world must know it, and Augusta must answer for what she has done." He hesitated. "My agent, Mr. Finch, has located the man who forged the letters. He was a clerk, deeply in debt. Augusta paid him a handsome sum. He has signed a full confession." Eleanor stared at him, her mind reeling. A confession. Proof. Hard, undeniable proof. For 6 years, she had lived under the shadow of a lie. She had accepted that her name would forever be stained. The thought that it could be cleared, that the world could know she was innocent, was a possibility she had never dared to entertain. "What will you do?" she whispered. "I must return to Blackwood, to confront her with it, and to make it public. I will not have my wife's name slandered. I will not have my son's mother live in shame. My wife, my son." The words were not possessive this time. They were protective. He looked at Julian, who was watching them both with wide, intelligent eyes. "I have to go away for a few days, but I will be back. I promise." He looked from Julian to Eleanor. "May I? When I return, may I see him properly?" It was the first thing he had asked for. After days of labor, of public humility, he was finally asking for something, not demanding. Asking. She thought of the cold, arrogant man in the library. She looked at the humbled, determined man standing before her, his hands raw from working for her, for them. They were not the same person. "We will see," she said. It was not a yes, but it was not a no, and for the first time in 6 years, a tiny, fragile seed of hope began to push its way through the frozen ground of her heart. Alistair's return to Blackwood was that of a conquering general, but his war was against his own past. He strode into the manor, his travel-stained clothes a stark contrast to the oppressive, polished perfection of the house. He had sent word ahead. Augusta was to meet him in the library. He found her there, standing by the fireplace, her face pale and pinched. She had aged a decade in the week he had been gone. The fight had left her, replaced by a brittle, defensive fear. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He tossed a sheaf of papers onto the desk between them. "The confession of one Arthur Pym, clerk, detailing the dates, the sums paid, and the instructions he received from you to forge my wife's letters." She stared at the papers as if they were a nest of vipers. She did not touch them. "He is a liar, a debtor. His word is meaningless." "He is not the only one," Alistair said, his voice cold as iron. "I have also taken a statement from Mary Stokes, the maid you bribed to lie about seeing Eleanor in the gardens. Her story collapsed under the slightest pressure. She is deeply ashamed and willing to testify." Augusta's composure finally shattered. "You would do this? You would drag the family name through the mud, all for that creature?" "That creature is the Duchess of Blackwood," he thundered, his voice echoing in the vast, silent room. "The mother of my heir, and her name will be cleared. I will submit these confessions to my solicitors. I will have the story printed in the Times. I will announce to the entire world that my wife was the victim of a vile conspiracy, and that I was the fool who believed it." "You will ruin us," she shrieked. "You will ruin yourself. They will laugh at you. The Duke who was duped by his own aunt." "Let them laugh," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "I would rather be a laughingstock who has his integrity than a duke who has his pride and nothing else. My life has been a hollow shell for 6 years, Augusta. I have nothing left to lose, and everything to gain." He walked over to the bell pull. "Your carriage is waiting. I meant what I said. You will go to the Dower House. You will live in obscurity, and if you ever attempt to contact me or my family again, you will be left utterly destitute. The Blackwood name you cared so much about will offer you no protection." She looked at him, her eyes blazing with a lifetime of impotent fury and jealousy. She opened her mouth to say something, another venomous barb, but she saw the implacable resolve in his eyes and the words died in her throat. Defeated, she turned and swept from the room, a whirlwind of bitter silk and shattered pride. Alistair watched her go, but he felt no triumph, only a vast, aching emptiness. He had excised the poison from his house, but the wound remained. He spent the next 2 days in a fury of activity. He met with his solicitors, who were suitably shocked and deferential. He drafted the announcement for the papers, a stark, honest account of the deception and a full, public exoneration of his wife. He did not spare himself, painting his own role in the affair with brutal clarity. He was the fool. He was the one who had failed her. Then, his public duties done, he turned to his private one. He went to Eleanor's rooms, untouched for 6 years, a shrine to his failure. Dust covers draped the furniture. He pulled the cover from her dressing table. It was just as the maid had described. The Blackwood sapphires lay in their velvet box, and beside them, a single, simple gold band, her wedding ring. He picked it up. It was so small. It felt cold in his palm. He closed his hand around it, the metal pressing into his skin. This was the symbol of the promise he had broken. He packed it carefully, along with the box containing the sapphires. He also packed a small, simple wooden box. Then he ordered his carriage. He was not returning to Oakhaven as a duke in a grand carriage. He rode on horseback, alone, a single valise strapped behind him. It was a pilgrimage, and he would make it as a penitent. He arrived back in Oakhaven 3 days later, exhausted, grimy, but with a clear conscience for the first time in years. He went straight to the cottage. Eleanor was in the garden, hanging laundry on a line. Julian was playing at her feet, digging in the dirt with a spoon. She saw him approach, and her hands stilled on the line. She watched him dismount, her expression cautious, guarded. He walked toward her, stopping a respectful distance away. "It is done," he said, his voice hoarse from the road dust. "Augusta is gone. The confessions are with my solicitors. An announcement will appear in the papers tomorrow, clearing your name completely." She absorbed this in silence, her eyes searching his face. He looked worn, tired to the bone, but the haunted, empty look was gone. In its place was a quiet determination. "Thank you," she said softly. It was the first time she had offered him anything resembling gratitude. He reached into his coat and pulled out the small wooden box. He held it out to her. I thought you should have this, in case you wanted it." She took the box, her brow furrowed. She opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was her wedding ring. She stared at it, her throat tight. The symbol of their broken past, offered back to her not as a demand, but as a choice. He was not putting it on her finger. He was returning what was hers, to do with as she wished. "And this," he said, pulling out the heavier jewel case. He opened it. The Blackwood sapphires glittered, impossibly blue in the afternoon sun. "These belong to the Duchess of Blackwood. They are yours." She looked from the priceless jewels to the simple gold band in her other hand. 6 years ago, she had left them behind as a statement of her rejection of that life. Now he was giving them back as a statement of her rightful place. "I cannot wear these here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to. I am simply returning what is yours. What you do with them, where you keep them, is your decision. Everything, from now on, is your decision." Julian, who had been watching the exchange with fascination, toddled over and peered at the sparkling necklace. "It's pretty, Mama." Eleanor looked down at her son. Then she looked at Alistair. He was not looking at the jewels. He was looking at Julian, his gaze filled with a raw, unguarded love that made her heart ache. "He asked about you," she said quietly. "He wanted to know when the sad man was coming back." Alistair's composure broke. His eyes filled with tears, which he angrily blinked away. "May I?" he asked, his voice thick. "May I speak with my son?" Eleanor looked at the ring in her hand. She looked at the man before her, stripped of his pride, offering her nothing but the broken pieces of their past and the hope of a future. She looked at the boy who was the living embodiment of that hope. She made a decision, not with her head, but with the deepest, most wounded part of her heart, which was finally, tentatively, beginning to heal. She slipped the simple gold band onto the fourth finger of her left hand. It felt strange, foreign, but also right. "Julian," she said, her voice clear and strong, "this is your father. His name is Alistair." Alistair sank to his knees in the dirt, ignoring the ruin of his trousers. He opened his arms, his face a mess of tears and dirt and overwhelming joy. Julian hesitated for a second, looking to his mother for confirmation. She nodded, a real smile, the first one Alistair had seen in 6 years, touching her lips. The boy ran into his father's arms. Alistair held his son, burying his face in the boy's dark hair, breathing in the scent of him, of sunshine and dirt and life. He held him as if he would never let go, and over Julian's small shoulder he met Eleanor's eyes. Her gaze was full of tears, but also something he had never thought to see again. Forgiveness, earned and therefore infinitely precious. They did not return to Blackwood immediately. Alistair stayed in Oakhaven for another month. He remained at the inn, but he spent his days at the cottage. He did not command or direct. He courted his own wife. He learned the rhythm of her life. He walked with her to the market. He sat in a corner of the cottage, watching her sew, content just to be in the same room. He spent hours with Julian, exploring the beach, building sandcastles, and answering the boy's endless, insightful questions. He learned about his son's favorite stories, his fear of spiders, the way he hummed when he was concentrating. Eleanor watched him. She saw the genuine delight he took in his son. She saw the respectful, almost reverent way he treated her. He never touched her, never presumed an intimacy that had not yet been reestablished. He was letting her set the pace. He was earning her trust, not with grand gestures, but with the small, steady currency of daily presence and unwavering respect. One evening, a storm rolled in off the sea, lashing the small cottage with wind and rain. Julian, who was usually fearless, grew frightened by the violent rattling of the windows and the roar of the wind. He had a slight fever from a chill caught earlier in the day, and his fear magnified it. He began to cry, clinging to Eleanor. Alistair was there, having stayed for supper. He saw Eleanor's distress as she tried to comfort their son. "Let me," he said quietly. He sat on the small bed beside Julian and began to speak, his voice a low, calming rumble beneath the howl of the storm. He did not tell a child's story. He told Julian about sailing, about the physics of the wind and the tides, about the strength of a ship's mast and the courage of the men who sailed them. He spoke of the storm not as a monster, but as a force of nature, powerful but understandable. Slowly, Julian's sobs subsided. He listened, captivated, his small, hot hand clutching Alistair's. Eleanor stood in the doorway, watching them, her heart full. He was a good father, natural, patient, and wise. By the time the storm began to pass, Julian was asleep, his breathing deep and even. Alistair gently extricated his hand and stood up, moving with a quiet grace. He and Eleanor were left in the small room, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant sigh of the sea. "Thank you," she said. "There is no need to thank me for looking after my own son," he replied softly. He looked at her, his expression serious. "Eleanor, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I must know. Is there a future for us? Can you ever see a life with me again?" She looked around the small, cozy cottage that had been her sanctuary. It had saved her. It had been her home. But it was not the future. Her son was the heir to a dukedom. He deserved to know that life, but not the one she had fled. A new one they would build together. "I cannot go back to being the woman I was," she said. "I cannot be the silent, decorative duchess in a gilded cage." "I would never ask you to be," he said fervently. "That woman is gone, and the man who wanted her to be that way is gone too. I want a partner, Eleanor, a wife who is my equal, whose counsel I can seek, whose strength I can rely on. I want you, the woman you are now, Ellen Croft, with the strength to survive anything. Eleanor Beaumont, with the grace to rule beside me." He took a hesitant step closer. "Come home, Eleanor. Not to my home, to ours. Let us build it together. Let us fill those silent halls with laughter, with life." He did not touch her, but his proximity was a question, a plea. She looked into his eyes, the stormy gray eyes that her son shared, and she saw the truth of his words. He was changed. They were both changed. The fire of the last 6 years had burned away the dross, leaving something stronger, truer. She reached out and laid her hand on his arm. His muscles tensed under her touch, but he did not move. "Yes, Alistair," she whispered. "We will go home." Their return to Blackwood was nothing like her arrival as a young, frightened bride. This time she entered on her husband's arm, not as his possession, but as his partner. Her son held her other hand. The staff, who had been told the true story, lined the hall, their faces a mixture of relief and joy. The house was different. Augusta's heavy, oppressive influence was gone. The windows were thrown open, letting in the fresh air and sunlight. The heavy drapes had been replaced. It felt lighter. It felt like it could breathe again. That evening, after Julian was asleep in his new nursery, a room filled with more toys than he had ever imagined, Alistair found her in the library. She was standing before the fireplace, where a cheerful fire now blazed. On the mantelpiece, she had placed the small, carved wooden box. Its lid was open, and the miniature of the sad, arrogant young duke was on display. "A reminder?" he asked quietly, coming to stand beside her. "A reminder," she agreed, "of how far we have come." She turned to him. "And of the man I have come to love, not the boy in that painting, but the man who chopped my wood and fixed my gate, the man who knelt in the dirt to embrace his son." He reached out and gently cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. "I will spend the rest of my life being that man for you, Eleanor. I swear it." "I know you will," she said. And when he lowered his head and kissed her, it was not the hesitant, uncertain kiss of their wedding night, nor the desperate kiss of a penitent. It was the deep, sure, and loving kiss of two people who had walked through fire and found each other, whole and healed, on the other side. The gilded cage was broken, its door thrown wide open, and in its place they had finally, truly, built a home,